From the conditions at certain prisons around the world to some punishment techniques seen globally, we've got a gruesome one today as we cover the top 10 dark prison punishments you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. I mean, who am I to say? Maybe you would, you crazy person you. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the re-education experiments. This is a type of punishment that was seen in a prison in Romania that was built in the late 1930s. This prison was called the Visitation prison, and the punishment is called the re-education experiments. Basically, this was a 3-step process intended to brainwash prisoners into giving up their religious and political beliefs and to alter their personality to a point where they would be completely obedient. The first step was known as external unmasking, and it involved torment being used with interrogating the prisoners. This led to the prisoners revealing everything about themselves and even confessing to crimes they didn't commit. The second stage was called internal unmasking, which involved making the prisoners give the names of people who were kind or lenient to them in the early interrogations. The third phase is called public moral unmasking, and it involves being humiliated in public as well as having to renounce their entire belief system. As an example, Christians would be dressed up as Christ and made to disgrace religious texts and sacred symbols. Prisoners would have their heads dunked into buckets of urine or worse. It gets worse from here, but I'll save you the disgusting details. The prison ended up being closed in 1952, and some of the people who took part and led these horrible things ended up being executed for their crimes. In our number 9 spot today, we have visitation. Rather than a specific punishment, this is more so just a horrible condition that prisoners at this prison have to endure. The Diyarbakir prison is located in Turkey, and it is well known for the absurd amount of human rights violations. Apparently, conditions in this prison are so bad that people would rather take their own lives than continue living under the psychological and physical distress that this location causes. One of the worst parts is in reference to those who have their families visit them while they're in the prison. It isn't exactly that common, as this place certainly isn't the most welcoming, but when it does happen, the families dare not speak a word. This is because, should they, these words might come back to be used as punishment against those in prison. In our number 8 spot today, we have bad conditions. This is another one of those conditions that is from one specific prison rather than a punishment, but I am sure this isn't the only place where this exists. Gitarama prison, which is located in Rwanda, is the most overcrowded prison in the world. It is said that the prison houses 7,000 inmates, although it was only built to hold 400. Because of the extreme level of overcrowding, the conditions at this prison are exceptionally poor. This means that men and women at the prison are standing barefoot on the filthy ground all day, which many times causes their feet to rot, and many require amputation. This is already terrible enough, but to make matters even worse, there is only one full-time doctor for the entire prison. This means that many of the inmates pass away before they can get the treatment that they need. It is said that this prison sees about half a dozen deaths every day. In our number 7 spot today, we have hooding. This is one that might not seem all that terrible on the surface, but that certainly is not the case at all. Hooding is basically the practice of putting a hood over the entire head of the prisoner. Not only is this dangerous, especially when the hands are also bound or in handcuffs, but it is also thought to be an act of torment due to the sensory deprivation it causes. Hooding is said to cause disorientation, isolation, and dread, and sometimes in the worst scenarios, it is used during interrogation to increase confusion or during other physical punishments so as to increase anxiety as to where the blows will land. This method is also sometimes used when there's groups of prisoners so that an interrogator can put them up against each other in a multitude of ways, and they will have no way to confirm the truth of it. In our number 6 spot today, we have music. Normally, music is a pleasant, lovely experience that really brings people together, but sometimes it's used as a sort of weapon. What's called no-touch torment is considered by many to be more humane than some of the other things we've talked about today, but that doesn't mean it isn't cruel or effective, as it is definitely both. Sometimes this can be done in the form of playing a song repeated over and over again, and sometimes it's through the use of extremely loud music, and sometimes it's just a combination of the two. This has been seen as a method in military prisons, and usually this is mixed with other things such as sleep deprivation, controlling the temperature of interrogation rooms, and violating the prisoner's religious or cultural beliefs. Even though the prisoner is not physically harmed, human rights activists still find these techniques to be a violation of human rights. In our number 5 spot today, we have medication. This is something that is more commonly seen in military prisons or detention centers such as Guantanamo Bay rather than federal or state ones. Basically, this is the forced feeding of illicit or psychoactive chemicals to prisoners, some of whom are then interrogated afterwards. I absolutely do not have to explain why this is unacceptable practice, as it is not only a violation of medical ethics but also a violation of human rights. Many times these sorts of chemicals are given without the prisoners being aware of what it is, and sometimes not even being aware that they are ingesting it at all. There was a huge scandal about this one when documents became declassified, and it was released that this was something that was going on at Guantanamo Bay. Some of those being kept here were dosed with a heavy psychoactive medication that is known to make a person groggy and then subjected to interrogation afterwards. In our number 4 spot today we have water. There isn't just one way that water can be used as a punishment, but perhaps the most well known and one of the most unsettling is waterboarding. Basically, this is the practice of pouring water on a cloth that has been placed over someone's face, covering their mouth and nose. Of course, this ends up making breathing exceptionally difficult, if not impossible. Usually this is done intermittently throughout some sort of questioning or interrogation so as to prevent death, but that is unfortunately not always the case. This is a method that has been seen and used all over the world, but in more recent years, certain areas have placed bans on it being used in any sort of prison setting because of the severity of the method and its potentially lethal effect. In our number 3 spot today we have work. Camp 22 is a concentration camp that is located in North Korea. Although it has been in operation since 1965, it was kept a secret for decades until satellite imagery revealed the dark truths. It is said that this camp holds over 50,000 men and women and their families because sometimes, depending on the person and the crime, their entire family could be arrested for a crime that they committed. Those held at these camps are malnourished and they live in terrible conditions where they're often physically punished, but here there's another sort of activity that they are forced to do. Those who are held at this camp are also forced to work in the fields and the mines for 12 hours a day at least, every single day. They work under grueling conditions for no gain, only the gain of those running the camp, only to return back in the evenings to even worse conditions and treatment. In our number 2 spot today we have physical punishments. Okay, this of course had to be on the list today as this is probably the most common form of punishment for prisoners everywhere. When I say physical punishments, of course many of these are, but I'm talking about hitting or striking or other forms of corporal punishment on this one. Sometimes this comes from those who have authority at the prison, and sometimes this comes by way of other prisoners. Many places have of course banned this sort of behavior, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It is said by penal reform groups that overcrowding and understaffing is the biggest contributing factor to this sort of punishment. This is because sometimes overcrowding can cause many people to be placed into one cell at a time, which causes high tensions and a lack of privacy. Other times, the understaffed guards are more defensive and it leads to an increase in this sort of behavior. In our number 1 spot today we have no sewage. Back with some more of the worst prison conditions I've ever heard of, this time we are taking a trip over to Mendoza prison, which is located in Argentina. This prison is another one that is way too overcrowded with about 3 times the max capacity of inmates. At this prison it isn't unusual to see as many as 5 inmates cramped into a cell that only measures 4 square meters. With this amount of overcrowding, you can imagine what a nightmare it is to not have a proper sewage facility either. This would be terrifying and also dangerous even if they were at the proper capacity, so I can't imagine with this kind of overcrowding. Inmates here are forced to use plastic bags and bottles as their washroom, and there's no kind of medical care for them at all. It is likely that the only time the inmates here are going to see a doctor is if they have already passed away, which truly is the most horrifying thing. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you all next time. Bye! Oh no! Alright, wiggle wiggle. Okay, Guitarama? That like Guitarama sounds like a fun place. Water break! I need some water. Thirsty, drinking too much coffee, uh-oh. Gotta stay awake, you know what I'm saying? Sorry, I almost died.